As Formula One drivers advance through their careers, they gain reputations, whether good or bad, for their tendencies and traits on and off track. In recent history, some very prominent examples come to mind. Esteban Ocon has a penchant for having run-ins with his teammates, Charles Leclerc is a qualifying wizard who can struggle on Sundays, and Lando Norris, who now has one victory at this year's Miami Grand Prix but has missed out on several triumphs since. Another particular one is Lance Stroll, who is often criticised for his incessant inconsistency and is labelled as an untalented pay driver by most. Some even call the Canadian the worst in F1 history, and while that's not anywhere near being true because he's not even the least skilled on the current grid, there are several competitors throughout the sport of 75 years that have built up reputations for similar inconsistent performances. Fans from the 1980s and 90s will remember Andrea de Cesaris, who retired from 147 of his 208 starts, although this statistic is rather misleading as the Italian often raced in bad machinery that often broke down before he had a chance to crash out. But even if he was a little bit clumsy, despite having the second most race starts without a win, just behind Nico Hulkenberg, he had several second places and a pole position with numerous chances to be victorious taken away due to factors outside of his control. Other happy-go-lucky drivers have come and gone without much success, but arguably the most infamous is one who raced for 5 seasons in the 2010s, winning one race but failing to achieve any other major results, often being labelled as a crash-prone nutjob for his supposed inability to keep his car out of other people or the barriers, but I don't think this affirmation is entirely fair. Let me tell you the story of the most misunderstood driver in F1 history, Pastor Maldonado.
Manuel Fangio is in the lead on the last lap of the German Grand Prix.
Jim Clark drives the Formula One Lotus Sport to victory on the racetracks of the world.
And look at that! Out that, colossally, that's Mansell. That is Nigel Mansell. Alain Prost has taken the advantage. Senna is trying to go through on the inside, and it's happened immediately. This is amazing. Senna goes off at the first corner.
And I've got to stop because I've got a lump in my throat.
Pastor Maldonado was born on the 9th of March 1985 in Maracay, Venezuela, and began his motorsport journey quite early, as he started riding BMX bikes at 4 years old, winning a national championship before attending his local karting circuit, Kartodromo Carmencita Hernandez, in 1992. He started racing karts in 1993 and did so until he advanced to single-seaters 10 years later, competing in Italian Formula Renault in 2003. He was driving for CRAM competition and finished 7th in the drivers' standings, getting a pole position in the season finale in Monza and 3 podiums, with the best result being 2nd in Vallelunga, scoring well ahead of future F1 driver Vitaly Petrov and other Junior Series contenders like Davide Valsecchi and Luca Filippi. Maldonado drove a dual campaign the year after in the same series as 2003, as well as doing Formula Renault Eurocup 2000. He took an impressive 8 wins and 6 poles in the Italian Championship, including a 5-race victory stretch at the end of the year, while in the European category, he opened the season with 2 consecutive triumphs in the first 2 rounds in Monza and a second at Ricardo Tormo, before failing to score any more podiums after that, even missing the Donington Park races. Also during 2004, he took part in a test with the Minardi F1 team at Misano, where despite his lack of experience, he beat the likes of future Jordan and Midland F1 driver Thiago Monteiro by over 2 seconds, and the 2014 and 2022 IndyCar champion Will Power by 4/10, placing 3rd out of 10 drivers, only behind Christian Albers and Patrick Friesacker, who both eventually ended up with the 2005 Minardi seats. For the 2005 campaign of Maldonado in Formula Renault 3.5 though, his season was marred by an incident in the Monaco round. He failed to slow down in the yellow flag zone while marshals were out on track and hit one of the track workers, injuring them and getting a 4-race ban, meaning his year never really got enough momentum to be any good, although he did win a race in Magione in Italian F3000 while he was benched in his main series. He stayed in Formula Renault 3.5 in 2006, getting 3 wins and 5 pole positions on his way to 3rd in the standings in what was a very weak field, then moved up to GP2, the last step before Formula 1, and won in just his 4th start in Monaco, a track he had a great affinity towards, but had to miss the final half of the year because he broke his collarbone while training, meaning he only finished 11th in the standings, although if you translated his start of season form to the end, he could have fought for 3rd place overall. Even despite his shortened stint, he still scored 25 of the Trident outfit's 35 total points for the season. He retired from 4 of the opening 6 rounds of 2008, but in those early gaps where he did finish, he got 2nd in the Monaco feature and 3rd in Magny-Cours. After a mid-campaign slump, he picked his results back up again towards the end of the year by scoring top 4s in 5 of the last 6 races, including a win in Spa. He needed to rule out his incessant spins and accidents, which took him out of contention in a third of the events he took part in, but despite this, he was only 4 points off a runners-up spot, while scoring 2/3 of his team's entire tally. 2009 started well for Maldonado, as he scored points in all of the first 8 races of the year, while the next best early consistent driver was Jerome D'Ambrosio, who scored in the first 4 races before failing to get into the top 8. This impressive streak included 2 wins for our Venezuelan protagonist, and he was momentarily in 3rd place in the championship, level on points with his teammate and eventual champion Nico Hülkenberg, but after that he only scored points 2 more times, with 4th in Hungary and in Spa, finishing 6th in the points standings, worse than the year prior. 2010 saw the Venezuelan move to Rapax, partnering Luis Razia. He had initially been mooted for an F1 driver of Campos Meta, who later became HRT, but when the team changed ownership from Adrian Campos himself to others being in charge, the seat was given to fellow GP2 driver Karun Chandok. In his second tier campaign though, after 6th in the Catalunya feature race and 3rd in the sprint, then 2nd in the Monaco feature, he went on a tear in the next 6 rounds, winning all of the feature races and taking 2 fourths and a 6th in the sprints. So despite retiring from a shorter Spa round and both Monza events, he'd clinched the title before the season finale in Abu Dhabi. He'd beaten out 7 future F1 drivers who did full-time campaigns, those being Sergio Perez, Jules Bianchi, Guido van der Garde, Charles Pic, Jerome D'Ambrosio, Marcus Ericsson and Max Chilton, and several other well-known test drivers and faces in motorsport, like Danny Kloss, Sam Bird, Oliver Turvey and Davide Valsecchi, and kept crashing mostly to a minimum, apart from during the Monza weekend where he binned it 3 times, although not all were his fault, and he also drove for Hispania and Williams at the end of season test in Abu Dhabi. It was the Grove outfit who signed him for 2011, and he would be partnering an F1 veteran and fellow South American driver Rubens Barrichello. Sponsorship from the Venezuelan state-owned oil company PDVSA gave Maldonado the drive over Nico Hülkenberg, who had driven for the team in 2010, which led to many calling him a pay driver who didn't deserve his seat over the German who had impressed in his rookie campaign. Nonetheless, he started his debut season in Melbourne and qualified merely 28 thousandths off his experienced teammate, yet had to retire in the race with the faulty transmission on lap 9. He was only a 10th off of Barrichello in Sepang in Q1, yet the Brazilian advanced and he didn't in 18th place, but he again went out early on with engine failure. He finished his first race in China 11 seconds behind Rubens, then was about a pit stop adrift in Turkey. The Spanish Grand Prix really saw Maldonado make his mark though. He was a scarcely believable 3.5 seconds clear of Barrichello in Q1 in dry conditions and made it all the way to Q3, just half a second away from the 3rd row of the grid in the 9th fastest car. He fell back in the race to 15th, but was still 15 seconds clear of Rubens at the checkered flag. Then in Monaco got into Q3 again in 8th place and ran in 6th before Lewis Hamilton sent a lunge on the inside of Sander Vogt on lap 74 and Maldonado turned in, causing the pair to collide. Hamilton got a 20-second time penalty for causing the crash, although he tried to blame the Venezuelan for turning into the corner, despite it being blindingly obvious they wouldn't have made it through side by side. It was a big points loss for Williams, and he was running a good 40 seconds clear of Barrichello, so he was clearly proving he had a very high performance ceiling. He outqualified his teammate again in Canada, but spun out of the chaotic race. Then in Valencia finished well off the pace in 18th, and more than half a minute behind his veteran counterpart. He showed his Saturday prowess again in Silverstone in 7th, but fell outside the points in the race, then finished 14th for the 2nd race in a row in Hockenheim. He was caught speeding in the pits in the Hungarian Grand Prix, which crippled his afternoon. Then in Spa scored his first points of the season in 10th, 35 seconds clear of Barrichello. The rookie continued to outperform the Brazilian in Monza, Singapore and Suzuka, then was level with him in Korea and India until he retired from both with mechanical problems. 2 penalties for ignoring blue flags in Abu Dhabi ruined his event. Then he crashed out of the last race of the season in Interlagos. In his debut campaign, he'd had 14 on-track incidents, whether those be spins in practice, speeding in the pits or anything else really, but if it wasn't for the crash in Monaco that wasn't his fault, he'd have tripled his far more experienced teammate in the standings. Only 2 of his retirements were his own fault, and beating a driver of Barrichello's calibre in your rookie season is mighty impressive. Some might point out the fact that the 11-time race winner was 38 years old and in his last year of F1, but he actually wanted to stay on for 2012 and didn't retire. He was fired by Frank Williams in January, so it wasn't like he wasn't a good driver anymore. Maldonado had shown flashes of absolute brilliance by getting into Q3 several times, qualifying as high as 7th in the undoubted 9th best car on the grid, running 6th in the hardest track on the calendar before being taken out in a crash that wasn't his fault. For 2012, he would look to build on a fast but inconsistent season, and was partnered by another Brazilian whose name brought experience and talent to the table, Bruno Senna. Okay, yes I admit it's his surname doing the heavy lifting there, but he had raced for HRT in 2010 and Renault for the last half of 2011, so he was actually better equipped in terms of track time than Pastor was. Maldonado put half a second on him in the opening round in Australia in qualifying and ran in 6th place during the race, right behind Fernando Alonso's Ferrari in 5th before he dropped it coming out of the old turn 6 on the curb, crashing out on the final lap while chasing a fantastic result. That's a potential 10 points lost from a squandered opportunity, and for the rest of 2012, I'm going to leave a lost points counter on the screen for every time he loses out on scoring points, whether it was his fault or not. He was running in 10th in Sepang and just a second off of 8th place John-Eric Verne when he had to retire with 2 laps left, putting his tally up to 11 points lost, then finished 8th himself in China with no issues. A poor weekend in Bahrain saw him qualify 17th, then retire on lap 25 with a puncture, then came the Spanish Grand Prix. Pastor had shown fantastic form the year prior in Catalonia by qualifying well above his car's supposed performance ceiling, but would he be able to replicate it again? He went 5th fastest in Q1, 1.6 seconds clear of Senna who was knocked out in 18th, then went fastest in Q2 by 3/10 from Lewis Hamilton. Surely he'll bottle it in Q3 and crash or make a mistake like he always does. There's no way that someone like Maldonado can take a pole position in Formula 1, surely. Well, he did. Lewis Hamilton actually did go faster than him by 6/10, but failed to make it back to the pits with enough fuel and was sent to the back of the grid, meaning Pastor was promoted to P1, becoming the first Venezuelan driver in F1 history to take a pole position. The race is a whole different ballgame though, obviously. Many probably predicted that he would bin it or crash into someone else trying to defend his lead, but while Alonso did jump him at the start, he only led until the second pit stop phase on lap 26, and from there on in, Maldonado kept the Spaniard at bay on his home turf. Fernando was held up behind Charles Pic before his second tyre change, but Pastor himself had a slow stop on his last trip to the box, so the two were even in that regard. Alonso closed up in the last 17 laps, but the Venezuelan kept him at bay, with the Spanish driver falling back after a mistake at turn 7 with 9 to go made him lose rear grip. Maldonado crossed the finish line first in Catalonia, proving a lot of the haters wrong and proving he could mix it with those at the top of the grid on his day. However, ever since this victory, conspiracy theories have popped up, ranging in credibility from plausible to completely ridiculous. Some people talk about a Pirelli tyre test that happened a few weeks before the race, and how Williams were the only ones to be able to work out the behaviour of a rubber going into Spain, but surely, if they had suddenly become the fastest team, Senna wouldn't have been knocked out in Q1. There are also people who believe that Bernie Ecclestone gifted Frank Williams a race win on his 70th birthday by giving the team special tyre compounds better than everyone else, but again, wouldn't that mean that Bruno would go a lot faster too? Claims that Bernie was just trying to get a 5th winner in 5 races, or that the fire in the pit garage after the race was just to cover up evidence, are stupid, because several high profile drivers like Hamilton and Webber hadn't won yet, so you could give them an advantage whilst being less suspicious, and surely he wouldn't have trusted Pastor, of all people, not to bin it as his first chance to win an F1 race. The idea that Bernie would start a fire to get rid of suspicious evidence is idiotic, because not only does that stuff only happen in movies, as it's never happened in Formula 1 before or since, but there were people in the garage at the time who were genuinely fearful and running out of there for their lives, including Pastor's own cousin, who he carried out on his shoulders, and lots of team equipment was also damaged, meaning there was a massive bill for that too. Bernie is crazy, but he's not that crazy. So I think we can all agree Maldonado's win, however out of the blue it may have been, was indeed on merit and he deserved it on the day. His weekend after though in Monaco saw him go from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows when he got a 10th-place grid penalty for an avoidable collision with Sergio Perez and another 5th-place grid drop for a gearbox change. He crashed with Pedro de la Rosa's HRT on the opening lap and retired, but had he started from his original 9th place position, given the fortunes of those ahead of him, he could have finished in around 7th place, meaning we can add another 6 points to that little imaginary bank of ours. He spun out of his only representative lap in Q2 in Canada after having set the fastest first sector and would have bumped Jenson Button out of Q3. Going off his Q1 times, he could have been on for about 7th or 8th, and could have held that position in the race, but as this hypothetical is a bit far strung, let's go for the 4 points for the lower position. Then came the European Grand Prix. While Senna was 14th in qualifying, Pastor was a very impressive 3rd, but he slowly fell back at the start through to the middle part of the race. When a safety car was deployed around lap 30, he was running 9th, but he'd made his way up to 4th by lap 41. Then with just 7 laps left, Maldonado started rapidly gaining on Kimi Raikkonen and Lewis Hamilton in front of him, and when Raikkonen overtook the McLaren driver, Pastor immediately went on the offensive by pulling alongside Hamilton on the start-finish straight on the penultimate lap. He couldn't make the pass there, but tried going around the outside of turn 12 further around the lap. Lewis did his typical move from his early career of shoving his rival to the outside and forcing him off track, then assumed Maldonado would just disappear. When he didn't, and tried to keep his position, they collided, and while Hamilton was out, Pastor limped home for a 10th place finish. He was given a penalty which dropped him out the points, but I don't think this was his fault. He got forced completely off the circuit, and while some people say he should have backed off, that's completely wrong, because he was alongside or ahead of Lewis throughout the entire corner. Even if he was to try and avoid the accident, he'd have to cut the corner, give the position back, then go for it again on the last lap. You shouldn't have to back out in that situation, and even though he was always there, Lewis turned in like he wasn't. This wasn't like Monaco the year before, because this corner was a lot more open than Sainte Devote. Lewis was just being his typical arrogant McLaren self, thinking he was the only car on track. That was another lost result for Maldonado, and while he was gaining on both Kimi and Lewis, I don't think he'd have caught the Lotus by the end had he got past Hamilton, so we'll say it's 15 missed points here. This is really starting to add up. He qualified 7th in Silverstone and ran there early on until he collided with Perez for the second time that season, and this one was his fault, but it was another potential 6 points lost. He ran 6th early on in Hockenheim, but did a 2-stop when everyone else around him ran a 3, so that's another 8 missed points. We're only halfway through the season, and you could already double his entire real-life 2012 tally and more with the amount of times he's either been unlucky or had self-inflicted incidents. In Hungary, he got a drive-through for a dodgy overtake on Paul di Resta, which nowadays would be a 5-second penalty at worst, meaning he dropped out of a potential points finish. Then he had another chaotic weekend in Spa. He qualified 3rd while Senna was 17th, and although he had a grid penalty for impeding Nico Hülkenberg in Q1, something that didn't actually affect the German as his fastest lap time from that session still got him into the next one 7/10 clear of his teammate, passed the jump at the start, vaulting to 2nd before getting caught up in the melee that Romain Grosjean cooked up at La Source. He recovered from that collision, but then crashed with Timo Glock on his way back up the field, the incident being a mixture of both Glock turning into him and him being a bit too audacious with a dive bomb. It's hard to predict exactly where he'd have finished if not for both incidents, especially as he'd have likely been handed a drive-through penalty at least for the jump start, but ignoring that, a generous estimate would be a 2nd place finish, and a harsh one would probably be 6th, and somewhere in the middle would probably be 3rd or 4th, either just ahead of Kimi Räikkönen or Nico Hülkenberg. We'll say 15 points here. Then in Monza, he started from 22nd thanks to penalties carried over from Belgium and recovered to 11th, just behind Senna, and could have easily gotten anywhere from 8th to 10th if he didn't have those penalties. I'll go in the middle, so 2 points for 9th. Then in Singapore, he qualified 2nd while Senna was mired in 17th, and ran 3rd until the pit stop phases, when his hydraulics gave up on lap 36, costing him another potential podium. He qualified a lowly 14th in Suzuka, but recovered to 8th, and I mean, if I wanted to be pedantic, if he hadn't have had the bad Saturday, he could have got 6th, but I won't count this as a lost result. A quiet run to 14th in Korea was followed by India, where he was running line astern with Senna until a collision with Kamui Kobayashi gave him a puncture. Had he beaten Bruno, he'd have gotten 10th, but this incident was his own fault, so I won't give it to him. He rocketed back up to 3rd on the grid in Abu Dhabi, and was running in the top 3 despite not being able to use his curves from lap 9 onwards. He had a collision with Mark Webber where the Aussie turned in on him and the Williams carried on while he spun, and he eventually finished 5th, his 2nd best result all season after his win. I think it's safe to say that he lost a hefty chunk of time thanks to losing his energy deployment system, and was holding on to 3rd for a long while even without it, so it wouldn't be ridiculous to say he was robbed of another podium like he had been in Valencia and Singapore, adding even more points to that ever-increasing tally. He had a quiet weekend in Kota, finishing 9th, then at the season finale in Interlagos qualified 6th before more grid drops put him to 16th, then he crashed out on lap 2. Overall, his season was characterised by unfulfilled potential. Even a lower estimate for the amount of points that he lost purely due to factors outside of his control gives him an extra 51, double what he actually got, and 8th in the driver's standings. Whereas a high estimate, including where you mitigate his driving errors, he has a tally comparable to Lewis Hamilton, Jenson Button, and ahead of Mark Webber, despite all of them being in far superior cars. Admittedly, in my higher estimate, I was taking the piss with some results, giving him a jump on people up to about 5 seconds ahead of him just because I can, but a sensible middle ground between the lower 51 and the ludicrous 127 lost points leaves him competing for 8th in the Drivers' Championship with Romain Grosjean and Nico Rosberg. Depending on which metric you use, he could have scored anywhere from 3 to 6 times as many points as his teammate Bruno Senna, and absolutely destroyed him in qualifying. That Williams probably wasn't the 8th quickest car on the grid like the constructors' standings suggest, but I genuinely believe that even with his errors, Maldonado was in the top 4 drivers of 2012, along with Alonso, Räikkönen and Hamilton. He got robbed of at least 3 podiums, all of which were bad luck and not his own fault, and despite being crash prone, absolutely dominated Senna. The Brazilian would be dropped for 2013 though, and in came the rookie and 2011 GP3 winner, Valtteri Bottas. The Finn impressed in a vastly more uncompetitive car than the year before, getting 4 points to Pasta's 1 thanks to a great drive to P8 in Kota, and fantastically qualifying 3rd in the wet in Canada, but it wasn't a whitewash for him. Pasta was only marginally slower on average in qualifying, and in races where both drivers finished without issue, it was actually the Venezuelan who came out on top thanks in part to great drives in Spain and Germany. His relationship with Williams soured towards the end of 2013, and he accused them of sabotage following the American race where Bottas got his great result, but I doubt there was anything of proper note actually going on. He left the team at the end of the year and was in talks to sign for Ferrari before his main sponsor PDVSA and the Scuderia were unable to agree on the placement of their logos on the car. They eventually ended up signing Kimi Raikkonen, and Maldonado signed for Lotus alongside Romain Grosjean, which was probably the most crash-prone driver lineup in F1 history until Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin decided they wanted to crack at that title. Pasta's 2014 saw him struggle to beat Grosjean in qualifying, but on average in the 6 races both Enstone drivers finished without issue, Pasta was ahead by a good chunk. Roman may have outscored him 8-2 in the standings, but his only 2-point scores came in races where Maldonado was either unlucky or didn't start. In 2015 though, he came back with a resurgence, having a famous battle with Max Verstappen in Austria, where he became probably the only driver in history to make Max drive off the road all by himself. Then in the last third of the season outscored his French teammate 15-13. He lost a good amount of points due to reliability or other factors, 33 in total, which would have seen him outscore Roman 60-51, but despite him cutting out a lot of his incessant crashing and dangerous driving, he still made a lot of mistakes. He was quite lucky to exist in the last era of F1 before car reliability became truly bulletproof, as this would highlight his own problems more, but seasons like 2012 and 2015 proved that his performance ceiling was amongst the best in the business. He left Formula 1 quietly, and a future potential return in 2017 with Sauber never materialised, but I genuinely believe he's one of the most underrated drivers of the 2010s. People nowadays think he was slow and crashed a lot, but in fact, he was fast and crashed a lot. He was basically Lance Stroll on steroids. He had more good performances than Lance, but more bad ones too. It's funny though, how inconsistent and crash-prone drivers' reputations are at the mercy of how they're perceived by the fans. Mick Schumacher was babied by everyone going, "Oh look at him, he's just an innocent rookie," despite him racking up millions in crash damage and only having like 1 or 2 good performances, only getting dropped once it was clear his surname couldn't keep him in the sport, while the likes of Maldonado, Stroll and co are vilified for paying their way into the top level despite being better than the likes of Schumacher on track. Even properly successful drivers like Jacques Villeneuve and Juan Pablo Montoya were error-prone, and they're seen nowadays as polar opposites. Until Villeneuve climbed out of a rock he lives under to lambast another inconsistent competitor, Daniel Ricciardo, which I did a video on, the Canadian was mostly seen as an angry and idiotic salty person who was just begging to stay relevant, whereas Montoya bad-mouthing the likes of Michael Schumacher and propping up his own ego in podcasts is cheered on by people who were stuck in 2004. Maldonado got on the wrong end of the stick in terms of how the fans saw him, and I think it was because of things mostly outside of his control. I don't think it was the crashing. I think it was the idea that he paid his way in with bags of money and then didn't care about crashing, even though it was actually the Venezuelan government's cash and not his own personal wealth. And it was also the fact that he was unapologetic when he had incidents that weren't his fault with big name drivers like Lewis Hamilton. The British media tend to latch onto those who don't tippy-toe around their compatriots, and even though both Monaco 2011 and Valencia 2012 weren't Maldonado's fault, he was made to look a lot worse than he actually was. His 2012 season was fantastic, and even when he got grid penalties averaging to 2 positions per race, he persevered and pushed 100%. He's the Colin McRae of F1, except he's not anywhere near as loved as McRae has been after his death, so maybe if after his F1 career he'd have had some horrible accident, people would sympathise with him like they did Romain Grosjean after Bahrain 2020, where everyone forgot about his mistakes conveniently, and instead looked at his great moments like the 2013 or the 2016 seasons. Pastor Maldonado could have had such a different reputation and career if things would have gone a multitude of different ways, but with that being said, I think that brings today's video to a close. I hope you enjoyed me detailing why Pastor Maldonado was the most misunderstood driver in F1 history, and if you did, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe to see more content from me in the future. You can also subscribe to my Patreon if you'd like to see exclusive content, get videos a day early, and have an opportunity to converse with me personally for as little as $1 per month. Big shout out to my already existing Patreon subscribers Andy Lamberts, Eamon Al-Dowdy and George Stratford, and you can also follow my X/Twitter account where I post boiling hot lava takes on Formula 1, IndyCar and NASCAR, and follow my Instagram for behind the scenes updates. With my shameless plugging over though, I'm Nedzo, and I'll see you all later. Bye!